not even close. And yet I'm sitting here in the present wondering if it will remain untarnished, and that's just a little silly of me. So anyway, I am the stand-in today. We joked earlier that I'm not going to picture you all in your underwear because I think that'd be more damaging for me than it would be helpful. But I am a coach, and so I do a lot of public speaking, and that was one of the things that my dad told me was just do what you do after practice, and whatever happens will be okay. I'm going to move this forward because I'm really far away. If you'll turn with me to Genesis 1:26 through 31, just before this passage, just to set the scene, God was hovering over the deep. And I really hadn't thought of it this way until I read this passage this week and was kind of putting some of my own spin on some of the notes that Dad left me. But God was preaching grace from the very beginning. And a lot of times we're not sold that in modernity, and the church doesn't do a good job. The church always says, well, grace and mercy are a testament away. And I wonder if that's not part of the business model, because we're more likely to show up if we feel bad, and if we're not remembering where we came from, because where we came from is very, very important. And I think one of Satan's sneakiest tricks is to try and remove us from where we came from and try and erase our history. George Orwell has some good stuff to say about that we'll visit in a minute. But to start us off, then God said, "Let us make man in our image." Hold that in your mind for a second. "In our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food," and it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning on the sixth day. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, becoming who we already are is the title of today's message. This was really tough for me to wrap my head around, mostly because I am not good at focusing on the good. That's a huge struggle for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who deals with that. You have always been beloved. You have always been beloved. That's how you started, and that's how you remain, regardless of what you've done in the meantime. Grace is an Old Testament memory that's still speaking. When my dad was a child, he left this story for me, and I picked through what he left me, and I used some of it and didn't use other things. So this is not just a recitation from Coach K. And that's just what I call him most presently, because I have to remember that's his name in front of the kids. So when he was a child, he would curl up beside my grandma when she would read him stories. And at the end of the story, she would say, "You are such a good boy." At the end of every story, didn't matter what had happened that week. And at the time, he mentioned that it felt like love, and it was, but looking back, he wonders if it was more than that. He questioned, was she speaking something over me or speaking something into me? Because in reality, there were probably a bunch of days where he wasn't that good. And she kept calling him back to something deeper than his behavior, than his current circumstances. So maybe she saw a truer him than what he saw in the mirror. Maybe she was prophesying. That was the last word in what he left me. And I said, I think nowadays we would say she's manifesting, and wouldn't you if you were his mom, right? I think there'd be a lot of manifesting on Randa's part. So have you ever heard somebody talk about a loved one who's going through a tough time? Maybe not someone blood related, but someone who's dear to you. and they say there's still a good heart in there, they just need to remember who they are. That's something, that's a human behavior, and it's incredible to me that we brush that off as kind of a Pinteresty doctor's office poster saying, right? You know, there's still good in there. And yet that is us exhibiting God behavior that we are genetically born with. They just need to remember who they are. There's still a good heart in there. Humanity reflects God behavior in that way. In the image of our Creator, we remember the original being in the same way that He remembers the original being. So sometimes we brush off the cosmic nature of our relationship to our Father as a coincidence, and I don't think it's coincidence. I think it's genetic. And we'll talk about genetics more here in just a second, because that is beyond fascinating. We identify who we know rather than what we know about them, and God does the same thing in His interaction with us. There's still good in there. That's not just wishful thinking, it's a sacred remembering. It's an innate God belief that people aren't defined by our worst moments, that buried beneath the wounds and the habits and the mask, there's still a name in there, and it's still true, an intentionally womb-woven truth. A belovedness that was never lost, only forgotten. So forgotten is where we're going to pick up today. Grace is remembering. My marker is weak, but the message is strong. Grace is remembering, and I had never really equated those two until I started digging around in this week and kind of listening to life as things get written throughout the week. This is all God. This is nothing that Josh put together. So in Genesis 1, as we mentioned earlier, grace comes first. And that's something that's not often sold to us. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that our story begins in Genesis 3 with sin, shame, and separation. And that grace is a whole testament away, but that's not where our story begins. It begins in Genesis 1 with beauty and with breath, with God saying, let's make humanity in our image. I have to get off on a rabbit hole real quick, because that was bugging me all week. Let's make man in our image. That's one of the things that we sweep aside because we're like, no, that's too weird. That sounds like polytheism. That's funky, and we've got the Trinity and all that stuff. And how are we made in God's image? So I did a little digging into psychology, and that's my sister's field of expertise. And I didn't resource her. I didn't give her a call. I probably should have. So whatever's about to happen, I'm sorry. From Sigmund Freud to Richard Schwartz and Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. No need to bless me, I did not sneeze, and those are not just sounds. Those are names. Those are a hodgepodge of some names we recognize and some we don't. In general, these four men are responsible for some of the major psychological schools of thought that seek to explain human processing and emotional behavior. Although their models are extremely different in approach, no one in psychology would ever equate Schwartz to Freud, mostly because Schwartz is lacking in the cocaine that Freud was, engaged in. So, but Freud's work is still widely respected, regardless of everything that he did on the side. All these schools of thought seek to explain human behavior in psychology. They're all wildly different. A lot of them vehemently disagree with each other, aggressively disagree with each other. Yet they each have one major common thread that I found, in that they strongly advocate for the existence of multiple internal beings. None of them are a school of thought that believes that there is just you in there. None of them. So this is kind of the rabbit hole of they created us in their image. The Trinity created us in its image, because oddly enough, as much as they all disagree, from Freud's id, ego, and superego, to Schwartz, managers, firefighters, and exiles, it's interesting to me that the accepted foundations of modern psychology all point to multiple internal beings that influence the one self, and furthermore, they all advocate for an internal collection of beings that number in the threes. So that was just an awesome little nugget that was dropped in the middle of my week through this research. And this morning, when I was doing all my revisions, I texted my dad. I was like, food for thought for you and Mom this morning. This will blow your mind. Probably didn't. He probably found that years ago in seminary somewhere. But he pretended, and that was nice of him. He let me feel accomplished. So he made us in their image and called us very good. So as I was reading that back to myself this morning, I was like, us takes on a new meaning, right? Now it's the multiple personalities thing that we just established within ourselves. That is okay. It's not something that we have to fear. We're created in the image of a triune God. And I, for one, through my whole life, have had kind of the me, the one that's telling me to do this, and the one that's telling me to do this. And a lot of times we're told, like, deny those voices, don't talk about those voices, you end up in a padded cell. We were created as a triad, from a triad. So that's just a fun little side note. But it ties back in with this image of God that we have got to grasp to understand grace and to let grace sit with us. We're good at accepting grace in the moment. We're really good at that. And then we go home and we dwell on everything that we've done wrong the last week and the last year and the last lifetime, and grace fades away. So here in a minute we're going to talk about one of the ways that I think from Genesis 1, God is telling us how to make grace more lasting. And it's through remembering. It's not through forgetting. Humans are really bad at forgetting because it never works. We're always trying to forget what we did. We're always trying to forget those dark closet things that we don't want to talk about. We're not going to forget them. And I think that's one of the things that Satan loves to work in, is that cyclical shame of trying to forget. We can't forget, and so it lives on. When God's just asking us to remember who we are. And who we are is what he still sees. So the Imago Dei, the image of God, that translation was free. Okay, no subscription necessary to Rosetta Stone, is our truest beginning. It's the truest beginning. That's its direct translation. It's original blessing, not original sin, that tells us who we are. Again, I think we get stuck in having been force-fed this idea that our story begins in Genesis 3. From dust we were formed, and to dust we shall return, is often repeated at us over and over again throughout our church experience. I love that scripture. I think it's misused in church a lot to remind us that physically we are of the dust and we're going to go back to dust. It's that reminder that you are perishable, right? And it's a humbling reminder that we need, but it has to have balance, I think. It has to have balance. And I think the business model of the church, as I mentioned, sometimes needs us to remember our dust more than we remember our original glow. And I hate that for where we've all come from. And I am sad that there are people still stuck in remembering their dust more than they're remembering the fire that they were born with. From dust unto dust is a valuable and humbling reminder of our fleeting and perishable nature on earth, right? Parents in the late 80s and early 90s really capitalized on this. I can bring you in and I'll take you out, right? That was, who was that? Was that Bill Cosby, I think, that said that, right? The great philosopher, Bill Cosby. But I wonder, that one's one that's not going to be in every church. But I wonder why we seem to forget the balance to that statement that God is so lovingly providing right here in Genesis 1. Because the balance to that statement is from dust unto dust. But what he's saying in Genesis 1 that we just read is, you were formed from me, and to me you will return. So there's the physical that comes from dust and returns to dust. There's also the soul. There's the spirit that has its own genetic makeup. And on your first birthday, he combined the two. And I think we really focus on the from dust to dust because that's the whipping. That's the whipping we think we deserve. You're perishable. You'll go right back to the sand from which you came. Right? But there's a whole other side to that. And the balance to that is in Genesis 1. He provided the balance right off the bat. He didn't wait a second. He didn't even wait for us to mess up. He didn't sit around and wait for us to give grace. There was grace before we fell in remembering who we are. So he gave us the balance right there in Genesis 1, and a lot of times we don't hold on to it. We don't use that. And we know we can because he does. If he chooses to only see that, what are we doing sitting here looking in a foggy mirror I think that's where Satan wants us. I don't think that's where God wants us. So yes, Genesis 3 happens. Yes, sin distorts and clouds our vision, but it does not erase the goodness God sown into us from the beginning. It doesn't unmake the divine image, and it doesn't blot out the reflections and mannerisms of our Father that we exhibit. One more time. Let's read that one more time. It doesn't blot out the reflections and mannerisms of God that we exhibit. When he asked me to preach, I sat on that email for longer than I should have. Because at my core, I knew that preaching wasn't very hard. I do that every day. At the beginning of practice, at the end of practice, for an hour in the parking lot with the one kid that's in shambles. Preaching was not very difficult for me. It never has been. Feeling worthy of preaching has been a stinking battle. So that hit me hard this week, that I have to remember that I still reflect God's mannerisms because I'm genetically of Him, and I can't separate that, nor can the devil. Sometimes we brush our God mannerisms off as coincidence, and we think, well, we're just a decent person. Without God genetics living in us, there's no decency. I'm here to tell you that we need to stop brushing off our God behavior as coincidence, and we need to stop doubling down on what we've done and start remembering who we are. Sin simply buries our God heritage under layers of fear, shame, and forgetting. I'm going to read this a little more, and I'm going to look up a little less because I like where God took me this week. Sin whispers our fallenness in our ear until our eyes glaze over and we forget that originally we are God's. If there was original sin, there's also an original us. We have to accept that. We have to accept that. Have you ever really pondered the human genome? I love this. Everybody's seen the Louis Giglio video where he talks about space and the cosmos, and Earth starts here and Earth just gets smaller and smaller until it can't be seen. And he's talking about the size of stars and the star-breathing God. The human genome is our genetic footprint that's 6 billion pairs long. You get 3 billion from mom, you get 3 billion from dad, and they match up flawlessly to create you. And that's just the physical side. That's just your physical body that will go from dust and to dust. That doesn't include that biology reaches an end, and biology cannot explain the soul. Our science has been around for as long as we have, and it hasn't been able to explain the soul. So there's a whole other genome on the other side that we don't even know about. There's a whole other set of DNA, a whole other set of spiritual DNA that came from God into you. That's the part that burns in the rubble. That's the part that shines from the ashes. And again, on your first birthday, He put those two together. I don't know how long the other one is. I can't help you with that. It's 6 billion base pairings long, and even that database falls short of biologically explaining the human soul, which He also authored and knit together. And because biology fails to explain the soul, I would argue that you have two sets of genetics. I'm rereading what I just said. Both of which can be traced back to the throne room. Both sets. From dust unto dust and from God unto God. Both of your sets of genetics can be traced back to the throne room. Since the first sin in the garden, I think it's been one of Satan's primary objectives to erode our grip on our own history and our own very real, very rich ancestry. I mentioned George Orwell a minute ago, and this quote popped into my head when I was thinking about why are we so disconnected with our lineage that literally goes back to the Creator. Why are we so disconnected with that? And I thought that this quote from high school popped into my head. George Orwell wrote in 1984, "Who controls the past controls the future." So I think Satan spends a lot of time trying to disconnect us from our past to control our future, when really what we just need to do is gaze upon where we're from. We're Okies. We're good at taking pride in where we're from. So that's a skill we can apply to this. Have we become so drowned in the whispers of what we've done that original sin has caused us to forget original us? Sin can cloud the mirror, but it cannot remove the reflection. This is the good news of grace. God is always calling us back to our origin, back to our name, back to the face we had before they were born. There's another thing I stumbled on, and I worked through all week, and you're gonna have to stumble through it with me. The face we had before we were born. I need to coach a minute, so buckle up. Don't ignore that part because it's hard to grasp. I think we do that too often. I think we sweep under the rug the things that we can't wrap our heads around when we're denying God the sense of wonder that He deserves. I think sometimes fear replaces wonder, and that's a very important distinction that we need to make. I would rather instead of sit in fear, I would rather sit in wonder, because that wonder in itself will still deepen understanding, whether you come away with actual answers or not. He knew me before I was born. Sometimes we brush off the cosmic magnificence of God when it's not easy to wrap our brain around something on the first try. And I don't have the answer. How could He know me before He mushed my spiritual and physical genetics together on the day I was born? Very deep medical term there, by the way. Mushed. Yes, that's in the, I'm sure that's in the book. What does it mean that He knew me before? I don't have an answer for that, and I don't even have the string to pull to get you started. But I do know that we have to break the habit of flying past that which we don't fully grasp. How would our love of our Father deepen if we chose to bask in that unanswered wonder instead of shy away from it? My mom always said, ask Him when you get there. And I love that because it reinforces the from Him unto Him sentiment that we've been talking about. And it gave me permission to wonder. And in the wondering, we may not find answers, but we will have a deepened sense of the grandeur of our Creator. I think that's the issue with sweeping those things away, is that we lose the sense of grandeur of the King of the universe who knit your genetics together one pair at a time until He reached 6 billion and said it was good. The good part of all this is it's not a complex remedy. You already know. As referenced earlier, Richard Rohr talks about the face we had before we were born. He writes, life is not a matter of creating a special name for ourselves, but of uncovering the name we have always had. Somehow we've forgotten. Not entirely, not irreversibly, but deeply enough that we go searching for ourselves in wrong places. That's the part that we are trying to forget constantly, that we can't seem to get rid of, is all the searching in wrong places. Our whole list of things that we've done poorly, all the list of mistakes, all the things in the closet, all the things behind the curtain, those are the things that happened when we tried to find ourselves in wrong places. The mystics speak of the true self, the unshakable core of who we are in God. Again, back to the Imago Dei, the image of God. The Christ in you that never stopped burning beneath the rubble of forgetting. The world teaches us to perform, to hide, and to hustle because hustle fixes everything. It does not. But grace invites us to remember. Sometimes I think we associate grace with forgetting. Again, this was my reinvention of grace in my mind this week. I've always thought that grace was, let me forget everything bad. Let me try to sweep away the bad things and put them out of my mind. I don't know if anyone has ever achieved that, where you fully forget all the things that you've done. And so reworking this image of grace set me free in a lot of ways this week, as far as He's not asking me to forget, He's asking me to remember. And that's what He does. He puts our sin as far as the east is from the west. And He can do that because He's looking at the version that He created the first time. And again, if He can do it, so should we. We've often been taught that grace is the forgetting of all the bad stuff we've done. God was clear in Genesis 1 that grace is remembering and dwelling in it, and the identity that He built the first time is how we take hold of it. That glowing beneath the rubble, that echo of the King that lives in all of His children, is what we have to hold on to and see in the mirror, as difficult as it may be. Forgetting is hard for humans, and it often leads to that cyclical shame that I mentioned earlier. I think Satan exploits that misunderstanding of grace. But this creation story, Genesis grace we're talking about today, is much simpler. It asks us only to keep our eyes on the truth of where we're from. Again, Okies are good at that. We're good at keeping our eyes on the truth of where we're from. So let's take that skill beyond regional community pride and let's take it to where it belongs. We've just come through a week where we're good at remembering where we're from. The red, white, and blue, the fireworks late into the night, which is annoying as they are, a fantastic reminder that at one point bombs were bursting in air. We're very good at remembering where we're from in the Oklahoma City and the United States sense, or whatever town you hail from. So we should apply that same pride to our lineage where it belongs and take it all the way to the top. You were loved into being. You weren't created to prove your worth. You were not created to prove your worth. You were loved into being. You were created to be loved, and learning how to accept that is a tough journey that is well worth the steps. If you've ever seen or read The Shack, one of the things that God says to Mac is, you were created to be loved, and if you can't accept love, you're like a bird that can't fly, and you will die there on the ground. The movie kind of shortens it down, but the book is much more clear on that. Before you were good, before you were moral, and before you were useful, God's first word spoken over you was yes. His first word spoken over you was yes. And he said it about the whole creation, but he also said it about you, and he also said it about me. On the sixth day, even though your genetics hadn't been mushed yet, and may not have been for several more thousands of years, on the sixth day, he spoke over you that you were very good. And I think that needs to be repeated in many of our minds. The same thing happened when I was sitting in the chair this week, and I learned, and I read that over and over again, that his first word over me was yes. Because too often my first word over me is no. Spiritual life isn't a ladder you climb. It's a return from dust unto dust and from him unto him. Both sides of your genetics will go back to where they started. Trust that you are already held, already known, already called beloved. He knew you before you were knit together. Grace is remembering that. The prodigal coming home is another Old Testament story that's filled with grace, even though grace isn't supposed to live in the Old Testament. I don't know what it's doing here. It's not doing what it's told. Jesus told a story about this kind of remembering, and in the prodigal son is another great example of where remembering and grace are unified and they become almost synonymous. A son runs away, burns through his inheritance, loses his identity, ends up in a pigsty. He believes he's no longer worthy being called a son, so he prepares a speech, right? We've all prepared a speech. We've all prepared a bargain, most likely to a parent or a boss or an authoritative figure. And we have set out for home. We've set out for where we're going to go unleash said speech, said bargain. But before the prodigal son can get the words out, his father runs to him, wraps him in an embrace, clothes him in love, throws a feast. And what happened in that moment? Did the son earn his way back? No. Did he become something new? No. He didn't change into something else in that moment. He simply came home to where he began. And in the welcome, he remembered. He remembered the goodness of his father. He remembered what love felt like. The bird remembered how to fly. And he remembered who he was. He remembered who he was. That is grace. Grace is the recounting of your heritage, not the recounting and dismissal of your sins. Not a servant, not an outsider, a beloved child who had always been a beloved child, whether he was off in a foreign country or not. He was born again, saved from himself by reclaiming who he already was, a beloved child of the Father. So now we have an exercise, because any good coach has to finish with an exercise. So if you'd all stand and take a seated position, no, I'm kidding. We'll do some aerobics. What if every breath that your body takes was a return? Okay, everybody close your eyes. We're going to do this internally with one of the three pieces that's running around in there. You have to wrangle them for just a second. Imagine the face of God looking at you with delight. Breathe slowly and repeat to yourself in a clear and confident internal voice, I am who you say I am. Quietly listen. If your name comes to mind, not a title, not a role, a name. Etch your name on the back of your skull and return to it often. And open your eyes. This is not about ego inflation. It's not about ego inflation. It's not about running around beating our chest saying that we're genetically of God. Because even the worst on this planet are. Even the worst are. And thank goodness they are, because that means I can be too. You are not becoming something new. Becoming something different sounds great at first. And our society is very keen on that, on becoming something different. We're pushing that onto people when that's not what they need. I think it's become another pathway that Satan uses to sneak in his agenda through well-meaning sentiments, preachers, teachers, and good doers. God asks us to remember what we are. He didn't make any mistakes when he breathed that glowing ember into you and into the rubble of our fallen world the first time. He did not make a mistake. You are not misplaced. You are returning to the you have always been. If there is original sin born into me as a fallen being, that means there is also an original me. And if the creator of the universe gazes only upon my original face, then maybe it's time for me to wipe the fog from the mirror and learn to do the same. So the question I would leave you with as we listen to this last song is ask yourself, what have I forgotten about who I am? What fog is on my mirror? And why is it there? Because God's not keeping that fog there. God is looking at you. He's looking at the original you, and he's been looking at the original you since he mushed you. Remember that you're not just a set of genetics that's from dust and unto dust. You have a whole nother genealogy, a whole nother billion-long chain genome that goes from here to the throne room. Keep that balance, from dust unto dust and from him unto him. This world can torture the dust into oblivion, and it might. But the part of you that biology can't explain is free to go home. Is free to go home. So, thank you all for enduring my look downs and look ups and my efforts to turn coaching into preaching. It's the same thing, really, and I just, like I said, I'm not going to picture anybody in their underwear, but I did picture you all as teenagers afraid of water, which is pretty much what we all are. And I say teenagers because we're hard on them, and granted they are wildly emotionally unstable, but I can't say that I'm too different. I'm twice their age. We won't get into the multiplicity of how many times older than some of you are than them, but I told my dad this morning, and I wanted to thank you all at some point today. I hate it when he asks me to do this, and he's asked me 1,000 times, and I've said no every time until this one. Don't know what changed, but New Wine is a place where you are worthy to preach. You are worthy to preach. You are worthy to preach and teach. I'm thankful for the opportunity. I'm thankful for everything that God did in these 7 pages. It has nothing to do with me. I'm not saying that because it's an easy put off, because I am a good writer. I'm not going to stand here and lie to you and say that I'm not. I get paid for my writing ability in many different venues, but that had nothing to do with me. None of what I learned this week had anything to do with me. The wedding I was in required me to wear a powder blue suit, so I actually thought about wearing it today, but I couldn't take one more Dumb and Dumber joke, so I decided to leave it in the car. But thank you for being a place where the flawed can preach and the flawed can teach. This wouldn't happen in many places, and I don't take that for granted. And I'm constantly humbled by being a part of this. This is a place where I've healed from my past in the church. My past in the church sent me out more damaged than it sent me out hopeful. And I had to watch as the church that everybody loved and everybody spoke well of abused my dad and abused my family. And those were really tough years. And then I had to, in the aftermath of that, I had to keep listening to people invite me to church and say, "Oh, church is such a great thing," when in my head I was saying many different things. And this place has taught me that that wasn't the church and that wasn't God. That was an institution. And I don't have to be afraid of the institution anymore. This is a place where I've healed immensely. And when I was in the institutional church, I sat with family. I sat wherever my mom told me, or I sat as far away from the people as I could. This is a place where a couple months ago, I remember I sat, but my seat was taken, right? My institutional seat was taken. And so I sat next to Ron and Petey, and there was no anxiety associated with that, and I thought there would be. Not because Ron and Petey aren't salt of the earth, but because I still had that old thing telling me that church people are dangerous. And there's nothing dangerous here, and standing in front of you guys is a joy and not a burden, and it's not fearful. And again, I don't take lightly that that's not many places. So I appreciate you guys and love you all. And we'll finish up with a song, hopefully. If it works, I'm going to text Ron Luca and I'm going to tell him that I did it better than he did.